Well, good morning. Thank you, Mary, for your reading today about Jesus calming the storm. And as I was writing this sermon, we were in the middle of a kind of storm. It's never seemed to stop raining all day today, and we're expecting a Storm Darcy, but I think it's going to affect down south more than it is up here. But every person listening to this, I believe, has some kind of storm in their lives, or has had some kind of storm in their lives at one time or another. And I don't mean storms associated with the weather, I'm talking about storms of life. You may feel like this pandemic's a storm that's blown in and caused absolute devastation, disrupting our lives, how we live, disrupting how things were. And we have to adapt to, or we've had to adapt to a new way of doing things to weather this storm. And in many ways, this pandemic has been like being in a boat in rough, stormy waters, with healthcare providers facing wave after wave and at times feeling scared of being submerged. And when things in our lives seem to be like a wave after wave of things happening that make us feel like we're going under, wondering if we'll survive the storm that we're in, I wonder, what is it that you believe about God when storms come into your life? What hope do you have? When a storm blows into your life, do you see God as good God or a bad God for allowing it to happen? And when you pray during a storm, do you see God as caring or uncaring, based on how he answers? What, I wonder, do you believe about God when things seem to be going horribly wrong? And all storms in life have the ability to bring to the surface what's really inside of us. Storms can reveal to us whether we live by fear or by faith. Storms can reveal to us if our heart is full of trust or doubt. The way that we react to God during a storm reveals the truth about ourselves, whether we want it to or not. Storms are kind of like a test, and it's during the storms of life that we discover what we really believe. Storms have a way, I think, of revealing the truth about ourselves. So let's just have a look at this morning's reading. Verse 35 says, As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, Let's cross to the other side of the lake. So they took Jesus in the boat and set out, leaving the crowds behind. This weather storm that is about to happen occurs at the end of the day, just as evening came. It had been a really busy day for Jesus, and it had not just been a busy day, I imagine, and an emotionally draining day too for him. The day started back in Mark 3, verse 20, and he'd been at loggerheads with the Pharisees, then he'd been accused by his family, then he'd spent time teaching parables to his disciples. Well, the disciples, they'd had a front row seat learning about God's kingdom and seeing the miracles that Jesus had performed. Jesus had been teaching his disciples with what he said and what he did, but now Jesus would give them a practical test to see how much they'd really learned. It's not enough for us just to be able to learn the Bible or repeat a passage. We must also be able to apply that lesson to our lives by faith. And this is one reason why God allows difficulties and storms to come into our lives. Storms are tests and opportunities to demonstrate our trust in him. Just look at what Jesus said in verse 35. Let's cross to the other side of the lake. I know that literally Jesus is talking about getting into the boat and going to the other side of the lake. But as I thought about this, about the other side, I thought, on this side of the lake, Jesus had performed miracles. He'd confronted the Pharisees. He'd taught about the kingdom of God. The crowds are growing and everything seems to be looking good for him. And on this side, the disciples' faith and trust in Jesus had been up to this point relatively straightforward. But on the other side, they are about to be tested. They don't know it, but a storm is coming on the other side. On this side, things are going well, but on the other side, things are about to get a little bit rough. And it's the same in life, isn't it? The other side to good health is illness. How would you respond? Is your faith going to be tested on the other side? The other side of a honeymoon is a broken relationship. How will you respond? Your faith is going to be tested on the other side. Storms are a test, and those tests often occur on the other side of life. Storms can happen suddenly, they can blow up at any time. And the Sea of Galilee is really, I suppose, a large lake rather than a sea. From what I've read, it's about 13 miles wide and 7 miles across. And what makes it really unusual and sometimes dangerous is that it's 700 feet below sea level and it's surrounded by mountains. What you have is warm air over the lake and cold air that comes sweeping down over the mountains onto the lake. And when that cold air and warm air mix, you get these horrific storms, and these can develop in minutes. So did Jesus know this storm was coming? Absolutely he did, I'm sure. This storm was part of today's lesson for the disciples. Jesus was going to to use it to teach them some things about himself and about themselves. And Mark describes this event as a furious squall, so much so that the waves were breaking into the boat and it began to fill with water. This fierce and violent storm happens so suddenly, and that's the way it happens in life, isn't it? One moment you're doing fine, and next a big wave hits us, doesn't it? And at the bottom falls out of our world. Just one phone call and you can find yourself in the middle of a storm. Maybe a doctor's appointment, a doctor's visit, and you come out feeling you are in a storm. One conversation and you can be in a storm. Things that can change our lives in an instant. Well, God isn't trying to trick us with this. He's not trying to hide something. God is really upfront and honest about the storms in our lives. And yes, sometimes storms can cause us to doubt God. Verse 38. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat on a cushion. The disciples woke him shouting, "Teacher, don't you care if we're going to drown?" There's a fierce and violent storm happening around them. The sea is really turbulent. The furious winds are blowing the boat and tossing it all over the place. They're going up and down in the waves, and some of the waves, it says, are crashing over into the boat. The boat's filling up with water, and the disciples, who, by the way, some of them are experienced fishermen, and they would have known the sea, they'd worked on it probably nearly every day of their lives for years. But they are in a panic, so as experienced fishermen, the storm must have been really bad for them to panic like they did. They're thinking they're about to die. And where is Jesus? He's sleeping at the back of the boat, sleeping on a cushion. But I think this is an incredible picture of God, where we see both aspects of Jesus. We see his humanity, the humanity of Jesus, and also the deity of him. The humanity of Jesus is seen in the exhaustion of him. Beginning that morning, Jesus had dealt with the Pharisees, dealt with crowds, dealt with disciples, probably dealt with the heat of the sun all day, and when he had a chance to sleep, he just took it. He was sleeping so soundly that this storm didn't even wake him. He was totally exhausted. And this is a picture of the humanity of Jesus. Well, the deity of Jesus will be seen in his power over the storm. He's about to display his power over nature as the creator of it. So here we have this incredible picture of both the humanity of Jesus and the deity of Jesus for all to see. And so we are told the disciples woke him shouting, "Teacher, don't you care if we're going to drown?" Well, first of all, their concern about drowning was completely normal and legitimate. Some were professional fishermen. They would have known how to handle a boat during a storm, but this storm was not like any other. Fierce and violent, and they believed they were going to die because of it. But what the disciples don't know is that this storm is going to be used by Jesus to teach them some incredible things about himself and also about themselves. This storm had become the real learning curve. It's one thing, isn't it, to learn something about God for yourself sitting in church or listening online like you are doing now. But it's another thing to learn something about God and yourself. Maybe when you lose a loved one or you are made redundant from work. When you can't afford your bills. When your health begins to fail. Maybe when your marriage falls apart. Some lessons can only be learned in the middle of a storm. And storms can teach us about God. Verse 39 says, when Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. Jesus had just demonstrated his authority over nature itself, and the disciples are beginning to learn more about who Jesus really is. They'd never seen this display of remarkable power before. So we too need to listen carefully when we are in the middle of a storm. It is there that God can demonstrate who he is, and there's a lot of lessons we can learn about God in the middle of a storm. Storms can also teach us about ourselves, can't they? Verse 40 says, then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" A fierce storm comes out of nowhere during the night. Jesus was sleeping from just sheer exhaustion. And then when the waves start crashing up against the boat, the sea starts pouring into the boat, the disciples just lose control and they begin to fear for their lives. Well, the concern is not about drowning. I think that was quite normal and reasonable. Jesus rebukes them and questions them about their fear versus their faith. It is not about their concern of drowning, which I think was legitimate. Jesus' rebuke is not about the reaction to the storm, but their reaction to Jesus in the storm. They asked him, "Teacher, don't you care?" You can learn something about yourself in the middle of a storm. You can learn where your faith really is. And yes, storms at times will stretch our faith. Verse 41 says, the disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." So up to this point, the disciples, they knew Jesus was special and quite unique, and that God was working through him. However, this event started a significant shift in their thinking about who Jesus really is. So then, in conclusion, here's the reality. You are either heading into a storm right now, maybe you are in the middle of one, or maybe just coming out of one. But God is teaching you something about himself, and about you, and about the storms of life. When you come out of the storm, you will not be the same person that walked into it. And that's what the storm is all about. You'll see Jesus differently, and you'll see yourself differently. And there are some things you can only learn when things are bad, when you are in a storm. But not all storms come to disrupt your life either. Some come to clear a path. Some storms help us to see things more clearly. Like a fierce storm that blows up and it can clear the clouds away to reveal a bright new day. So the storms of life can clear things in our lives so we can have a bright new start. Amen. Now I'm going to listen to a song, and then Beverly is going to lead us in prayer. God bless you all, and I hope to catch some of you on Zoom a little later. Bye bye.